that you'll find this valuable. And by all means, reach out to us if you have any questions afterwards. We'll save some time at the end so you can ask questions, but we'll also give you our contact information. So if you need to reach us, you can. I also want to point out on the right-hand side in the dashboard that you have, you'll see a couple things over there. One is a handout, which is copies of today's slides, except for the 2 bio pages, which I added a few minutes ago. And also there's a chat box. As we go through, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and put questions in there. We'll hold them until the end, and then we'll go through them and address as many of them as time allows. So this is me. As I mentioned before, I'm president and founder of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Our business is really human resources consulting, recruiting, and training. So we're pretty much a one-stop solution for any small business owner looking for some help with regard to people problems. This is Kimberly Scott. Kim is our director of recruiting. She's been with the firm for the last 3 years, and she heads up our recruiting. Excuse me. Kim has a really strong background in recruiting and consulting and also training. She started her career in operations, and that really gave her a lot of experience in both people engagement and also people development. And then she now has some certifications in recruiting and has been doing this for the last over 15 years. So again, you're talking with 2 people that do a lot of recruiting in our background, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some tips. So I'm going to get started, and today what we're going to talk to you about is providing you some tips on how to understand really how recruiters think. A lot of times I know when candidates are looking for a job, they feel like the resume goes into some black hole. We don't want that to happen to your resume, so we're going to give you some tips to make your resume stand out from the rest of the candidates. And then Kim's going to talk about interviewing techniques and some things to keep in mind when you go for an interview that we think will help you. So just a disclaimer to get started, recruiters like different things, and I'll tell you on a few of the slides when we get there where my opinion may differ from another recruiter's. It may be differ from Kim's, in which case she can speak up and share that with you. You know, we together probably have about 45 years of experience in HR and recruiting. These were just stats that I put together from my background. You know, I've probably hired over 1,500 people in my career. I've seen well over 50,000 resumes over the last 25 plus years I've been doing this. So I do have some opinions on what I think works and what doesn't work that I'll send to you. But at the end of the day, it's really about you. So if I say something that you go, oh, wow, that doesn't feel right to me, then don't use it. Hopefully you're going to get a lot of tips that you do like, and try them on for size and see what makes the best sense for you. But it's got to be about you at the end of the day, so I just want to point that out to you. So let's start by talking about how does a recruiter think. The best way I can explain that to you is to give you an example. So let's say we're recruiting a purchasing manager for one of our clients. There are a variety of ways we're going to go out and that we're going to source resumes. We could definitely run an ad. We could post at different places. We could source resumes through networking. We will look for people on LinkedIn. We may use other resume databases, Indeed or Monster or CareerBuilder or other ones that we can subscribe to. But let's say however we did it, we ended up with 205 resumes in our candidate pool. I'm not going to contact 205 people. It's way too intensive from a labor standpoint. And you also have to remember that if you're a hiring manager or a recruiting person, you've got more than one job you're trying to fill at a time, right? So from a candidate perspective, you're looking at it as this is the only job, the most important job there is. But from our point of view, we've got a lot of other things going on that we're trying to deal with. So my job, if I'm trying to fill this position, is to do it as quickly as possible. And I'm going to take that pool of 205 resumes down to a more manageable level, probably 10 to 20 candidates that I will phone screen. So maybe 5 or 10%. That's not a lot. So that just means, we went through and wiped out 180, 190 resumes of people. We're never going to talk to them. Okay, so you're going to be in a small percentage, and that's why it's so critical you have a resume that stands out from the pack. From that phone screen of 10 to 20 candidates, we'll probably narrow it down to 5, maybe 8 people we're going to interview in person. When Kim and I do this for our clients, she does all of the initial legwork, reviewing the resumes, doing the phone screen. She'll do longer phone interviews, and then we'll get together and interview the candidates in person before we ever refer somebody over to a client. So we'll talk to 5, maybe a few more depending on how we like the first 5, and then we're going to send on probably 3, could be more, could be less, to the hiring manager to make the final decision and to see who they like. So the thing that I really want you to understand is when we are dispositioning resumes, this is not an inclusive process. A lot of times candidates will say, oh, but I have the perfect experience. That may be, but I cannot spend time talking to 205 people. So my whole thought process is, how do I take those 205 candidates and narrow it down as quickly as possible? So what I'm going to do is let's say they're coming in through Outlook. It could be an applicant tracking system, whatever, but wherever my bucket of candidate resumes resides, I'm going to go through, and as quickly as possible, I'm going to put you into one of 3 categories: yes, no, or maybe. And the no's are going to be really clear right off the bat. The yeses, a couple of them will be yes, and then for a while until I get through the first 50 or so resumes, I'm going to have some maybes until I see what I got. Because then I'm going to narrow the maybes. I'm going to go back and put those into the yes or no bucket so I can get down to that 10 to 20 resumes I'm looking for. So keep in mind, I'm looking for reasons to exclude your resume, not to include you in the pile, okay? So you want to do everything you can to stay out of that no pile. So here are some tips on how to get your resume to be noticed by recruiters and to stand out from the crowd and to stay in that yes pile. So the acronym that I use is FEATS. We're looking for fit. And yet cultural fit could be difficult to determine based on paper, but one thing that you should be noting on your resume is the company size. So you can put that in terms of revenue, you can put in terms of headcount, both, whatever you want to do. But if I've got a client that is a family-owned business and they have 25 employees and they're looking for a purchasing manager and you're working for Boeing and you're a purchasing manager, that's not a good fit, right? From a culture standpoint and a company size standpoint, just from a resource standpoint. So fit's really important. Sometimes that'll come out more in the interview process itself. I'm, of course, looking for experience. Have you done similar work before? Have you ever been a purchasing manager or at least done some purchasing before? I'm looking for your achievements. How are you better than everybody else? I don't need a job description. I have a job description. What I'm looking is, how well did you do that job better than everybody else that's sending me the resume? And we're going to spend some more time talking on that in a minute. Fourth, I'm looking for your track record. Have you had a stable work experience track record? Are you trending in the right direction? Were you the vice president of purchasing and then became director of purchasing and now you're looking for a purchasing manager job? That's probably not trending in the right direction, right? But did you start out as a buyer and then a senior buyer and now you're looking to move into management? Did you have a lot of gaps in your experience? So I'm looking for all of those different things. And then, of course, just the overall style of the resume. It's not a resume writing contest, but if your resume is not visually appealing, if it's super long, if there's typos on it, things like that, that's going to get you kicked out into the no bucket very, very quickly. So let's talk about some of the things that will get you excluded right away. One is if your experience or your job titles don't match the position. And I don't mean, we're recruiting for purchasing manager and your title was buyer. Okay, I may still look at it because, again, if you're a buyer at a company, you're doing purchasing, it may be appropriate. I'd have to know more. So you might go into my maybe column for a while. But if you're a controller at a company and I'm looking for purchasing manager, I'm probably not going to read past that title to see if you've done purchasing in the past. I'm just going to put you into my no's. If you have an objective, and I'm going to tell you in a minute just to lose the objective entirely, but I can't tell you the number of times we get a resume and it'll say, oh, my objective is to be an accounting manager, but you're applying for a purchasing manager position. That's going to get you kicked out immediately. If I see typos or misspelled words or poor grammar, if it just doesn't read well, it's like too hard to read, I'm not going to go any further because, again, I've got 185 or 204 in this example, other resumes to get through. So I'll find the next one that's easier to read. If it's too long, and recruiters feel differently about this, I mean, take as much time as you need to include the important stuff, but usually you can do that for any length of experience in less than 2 pages, 2 pages or less. So if it's too long, or if it's boring, or if it just reads like a job description with no measurements on it at all, it's just, you know, I purchased raw materials, I, you know, sourced vendors, whatever. If it just reads like a job description, then you're going to end up in the no pile. So let's talk about some of the things you do not need to include on your resume. One is an objective. And again, some recruiters may feel differently, but I think having an objective at the top is just a waste of space that you could use for more important things. So what I usually recommend is that you use a summary statement instead, followed by a list of keywords that would be searchable, number one, but this would be the first thing we would see when we open up your resume other than your contact information at the top. So it gives you an opportunity to describe yourself and what you're really good at. So you can pick out some adjectives in here, you know, like a dynamic leader and results oriented, you know, able to motivate teams, things like that, adapt to changing environments, fast-paced environments, you know, those type of phrases and words where that might be difficult to put in the normal chronology description of what you do, but it's a great way to do it at the top to sort of give a flavor to who you are and what makes you stand out from the rest. And then, as I said, you can also put some keywords right below it, some skills that you have. One thing I wanted to note is if you speak any second languages, or you write second languages, to make sure you always call that out someplace on your resume as well. So in this particular resume I wrote a few years ago for somebody, he didn't have a second language, but if so, I would have put it either in that summary paragraph or listed it along with the other skills, because you never know when that's going to be what sets you apart from somebody else, especially when you're working in manufacturing. Here's some other things not to include. Personal information. Okay, if you look at all the things in the parenthetical there, I have seen every single one of these things on resumes before, believe it or not. People have included just the craziest things that are irrelevant to the job and make recruiters and hiring managers very nervous. We don't want to know stuff like this, especially on your resume. It's not germane in making a decision about whether or not to hire you. So don't do anything, again, that's going to get you into the no bucket. Membership in political or religious organizations, this is my feeling on that. If they're, of course, relative to the job, then you want to include them. Be yourself by all means. Just recognize that unless it's really who you are and what you're looking for, you stand to alienate a large segment of the population. So for example, if you say, hey, I was president of Young Republicans organization, awesome. That shows leadership, it shows other qualities, but you don't know what's your hiring manager. Did your hiring manager just go campaign for a Democrat, right? Or vice versa. Same thing with religion. So if it's who you are and the type of job you're really looking for, and if that's really important to you, by all means, keep it on your resume, but just go in eyes wide open knowing that you may be alienating some other people. Same thing about hobbies. Hobbies are great. You know, everybody should have hobbies, but unless it's job related, probably don't need to put on the resume. And if you do put anything on there, just short and sweet toward the end. And please do not put a picture on the resume. If I get a resume with a picture on it, the first thing I do is take it off. And if it's a PDF and I cannot remove it, then I'm going to either just delete the resume entirely, or I'm going to send you an email if I have time to say, please resend it without the picture. Again, that makes recruiters and hiring managers really nervous, because we don't want someone coming back later and accusing us, you know, that we were, you know, discriminating based on gender, age, or race, or anything else that we might be able to glean from a picture. Few more things to keep in mind. Work product samples. When you send a resume to us, really all we want is the resume. We don't want samples of work product or anything like that until you're asked. If you read a job posting or you're talking to someone and they say, oh, can you send me some samples? Then of course follow those instructions. But unless you're asked for them, don't include them. Same thing with references. You don't need to include references until you're asked. And on your resume, you can take off that phrase, references available upon request. We know they're available upon request. If you want the job and I ask you for references, you're going to give us references. So there's no reason to even list that. The other thing, and this is again a personal bias I have, I personally believe that cover letters are pretty much a waste of time. And I know a lot of candidates out there who really agonize over customizing every letter. And I'll tell you right now, a very small percentage of them, if any, get read. I never take the time to read a cover letter with a few very minor exceptions. So I'm going to tell you what those are. The first one is if you're referred by somebody, so you have a connection in, or you have somebody in common with the hiring manager or the recruiter, or you know people that work at that company or anything like that, where you can draw the recruiter's attention to some common ground, then that's probably a good use of a cover letter. Or even if it's an email where you're sending a resume, for example, like let's say you're sending a resume to me and you put in the subject line, I was referred by Lisa Anderson, right? I know Lisa, right? You know Lisa, I'm going to be more inclined to open up that email, read your resume than I would be if it just comes blind in response to an ad. If I look at your resume and this position's in Southern California and you live in New York, then I'm going to expect that someplace you're going to explain to me how you're going to relocate yourself on your dime, because my client's not going to pay for your relocation. So that's probably another place where, and when I say cover letter, it could be that, that email where you might want to just call out what's going on with your situation, or you're in the process of relocating or something like that. And then of course, again, if somebody requests it, whether that's verbally or in a job posting, you definitely then want to follow those instructions, because that may be part of how they're screening people to see who follows instructions. So anytime in a job posting, in particular, you see any instructions, put this in the subject line, reference this in your email, anything like that, make sure you're taking the time to follow those instructions, because they could be looking to see how detail-oriented you are and screening people out based on that. One other word about relocation. If you are, like, let's say you're going to school right now in Inland Empire, but you want to go home to Texas to find a job, when you start sending out your resume, what I would suggest is that you put Texas contact information on it. You don't need to put any sort of street address on resumes. You can put a state or zip code if you want to. These days, really, an email and a telephone number is all you really need. So again, just be aware you don't want to do anything that's going to get you screened out. Okay, so the second tip is really choose the resume type that's best for you. The most common resume, and the one that's preferred by just about everybody, is chronological. That's where it's going to give a summary at the top like I showed you, and then it's going to go right into work experience with each of the positions you've had. It's great for career progression. Again, if you went from buyer to senior buyer to purchasing manager, to keep using that example. It highlights those positions and the companies in order. That's great. Sometimes, though, you might want to take a look at a functional resume, and that's really more about describing the skills and achievements you have and grouping, common skills and experience under that skill, like purchasing, management, budgeting, whatever. That's really good to use if you have a lot of gaps or you want to change careers. So if you're trying to demonstrate how you have transferable skills from what you've been doing to the new position. Some hiring managers and recruiters don't like functional resumes. They think you've got something to hide. That could be, but it also could get you a job. So the question I pose to you is, why not use both? It's really easy to go out and get a Gmail account or some other email that you can use one email for your chronological, one email for your functional, and then just track to see what's getting you the most traction, and then you'll know from there which one to use going forward. In applicant tracking systems where you're uploading a resume, filling out something in a software program, usually the email is going to be the identifier that they use. They should not be asking you for a social security number at that stage of the process. So the unique identifier should be the email, and that's why I suggest using a different email for different types of resumes. Tip number 3, and this is really, if there's one thing you walk away from today, from my part of this presentation, this would be it. You want to document your measurable achievements. Okay. It's not about the job description. There are a lot of people that could send a resume in that say purchasing manager or something similar, but it's about how you did that job better than everybody else. right? What's unique about you? Where were your successes? And what you want to do is use action words, meaning verbs, to describe those achievements. And pay particular attention to the phrase responsible for. I see it on resumes all the time. And responsible for is usually followed by a verb. Responsible for, buying raw materials. Just say buy raw materials or bought raw materials. Responsible for managing a team of 5. Managed team of 5. Okay, you don't need the phrase responsible for, so just take it off. Now let's talk about measurable achievements. It's really about what you can do for a prospective employer, okay? One of the things that makes us a little unique in our approach to recruiting is we really try to get our clients to get away from what the candidate must have to be successful, so many years of experience and a certain education and certain certifications, and really get them focused on what the candidate must do to be successful. And so one of the ways you can do it, you might have seen this before, is use PARs to describe those past achievements. So what pain did you solve, what action did you take, and what were the results? So I'll give you an example. So you might say, you know what, when I got to this client or this new employer, their costs were continuing to rise, right? That's the pain, right? Their costs had gone up by whatever percent year over year, which was making it hard for them to, have a net profit margin. So I sourced 3 new vendors, negotiated contracts, and reduced our costs on raw materials by 10% year over year. Okay, that would be a great measurable achievement to share with a prospective employer. So you can hear how that's different from, I bought raw materials, to, okay, I solved this problem that they had with the rising costs and saved money year over year. It means, how did I do this better than the other candidates? So that's really an important thing that you want to pay attention to. So let's talk about the ways you can measure achievements. And I do have a handout on this. If you want to email me, and my email will be on the last slide. If you want to email me, I'm happy to send it to you. So 5 basic ways to measure achievements. The first one's money. So think about it in terms of revenue increased or cost decreased, maybe budget managed. So it could be I increased revenue by 15% in the first 6 months, or I negotiated a service agreement which lowered costs by 10%. I manage P&L responsibilities of $10 million. Whatever it is, something around money. Second one is time. So usually that's a process time decreased. It took me, an average of, 7 days to close the end of the month, and now I can do it in 2, something like that. So I decreased a process time by a certain percentage. Or it could be that maybe you did something and it increased the life of a product. It made it longer. So either one of those type of things. Quantity is simply something you can count, right? I answered 200 incoming calls a day. I assembled an average of 350 parts a week. I managed staff of 15 people. Anything like that in terms of something you can count. Quality, it could be, you suggested a process improvement that took the defect rate on a part from 3% to 1.2%. Or it could be something like I completed an Excel class and I scored 100% at an advanced level. I received a rating of outstanding from my department manager on my last performance appraisal. Something that's going to, comment on the quality of your work. The 5th one is reaction, meaning human reaction. So there's a lot of times where you may not be able to quantify something like you can with the money, time, quantity, and quality, but you still can do it on a human reaction. It could be something like that you received a rating of 4.7 out of 5.0 on the audience's presentation survey or on my performance appraisal or something like that. Or it could be like customer service scores improved. So think of that last one almost like Yelp, right? How many stars do I get? So it's other people rating you and giving you some sort of reaction. So those are the 5 basic ways. And again, if you want the handout, just go ahead and shoot me an email. So a couple more things on measurable achievements. You want to make them as specific as possible. You want to use those measurements. Don't lie, don't make stuff up, right? But estimates are fine. I can't tell you how many times I'm working with a candidate and they get hung up on, well, I can't prove it was 11.6% or I don't know, it could have been 10.9%. It doesn't matter, right? Just put your best estimate down because I'm not going to know either and I'm not going to ask you to prove it. What I am going to ask you is, how did you do that? How did you achieve that? Who did you work with on that? right? What kind of challenges did you have? Whose idea was that? I'm going to ask you questions that you need to be able to explain, but I don't really care if it was 10.6 or 10.2 or 11.3. It doesn't matter. Okay, so give your best estimate on something, right? Choose the way of expressing the measurement that makes you look the best, and that's really up to you. But it could be, you could say I increased revenue by 10%, or I could say I increased revenue by 200% year over year. Both may represent the exact same measurement. You just have to decide, okay, this one sounds best, or I think this is more impressive, okay? Same thing, decreasing average time to fill for a recruiter. Is it better to say I took 5 days off that process, or I decreased by 20%? I don't know. It could vary depending on the place you're applying. It could be something you saw in the ad. It could just be how you feel about it. And then try to mix up the types of measurements so you're hitting on all 5 of those things. Because to some hiring managers, quantity may be really important. To others, time may be really important. So give them samples in different ways of measuring. There's a lot of sources of achievements you have. So I would encourage you to go back, look at performance appraisals you've received from bosses. Look through emails you've gotten from coworkers or professors or bosses or customers or whatever that have somehow complimented you on a job well done, okay? Because that'll probably remind you of things that you've forgotten. Certainly if you have LinkedIn recommendations or letters of reference, go through those to just pull out anything you can think of that could be used as an achievement. If you were ever promoted, think about why you were promoted. There was undoubtedly something that you did really well, something that you achieved in that time, or just the fact that you got promoted, you can make a comment about that. Maybe you were promoted quickly, or you were the first something. I was the first HR manager at the first job I ever had at that company. I could put that on my resume. If you won any awards, you have certifications, any of those things, you want to include that. And then also just think about, what are you most proud of in each position? That's one of the questions I like to ask candidates all the time is, when you think back about this last position, what was your most significant accomplishment? What was the thing that you're proudest of? And for some people, it's something that's really measurable, like saving money. And for other people, it's, I'm really proud that nobody on my team ever left, or people followed me to my next job, or, our team did something. So just think about what are you most proud of, because that'll help you come across as being really genuine in the interview, and that's something Kim will talk about in just a minute. Okay, my fourth and final tip, make it easy to find your resume. Again, I don't want to come off sounding really difficult, but I am going to tell you time is limited, right? And if we're working on multiple positions at the same time and we've got other things going on, you need to make it easy on a recruiter to be able to find your resume and to contact you. So I suggest you always include your zip code. These days it's almost impossible not to on any applicant tracking system or anything like that, but we are going to search by radius around a zip code. So if we've got a client, for example, in Chino Hills, we're going to take that zip code and then we're going to say, okay, search, 10, 20 miles, around that zip code in order to narrow down our resumes. So make sure you include your zip code. Also make it easy for us to contact you. I suggest you put contact information in the header of your Word document or your PDF, because that way if pages get separated when they get printed out and thrown into a folder, I don't have time to staple them. I go off to, interviews and all of a sudden, big win comes up and I've got pages all over the ground. I need to be able to put them back together again quickly and be able to contact you. You want to make it also multiple ways. So an email and a cell phone is probably the best 2 ways. Definitely include searchable keywords or buzzwords. So I showed you on that one example, the sort of when you open up a resume, that's what I would expect to see at the top. But throughout your resume, you want to make sure you're using those searchable keywords, because again, if we're going out into a resume database and we're looking for resumes and we're trying to find people, we're going to be able to narrow down all of the resumes that are out there most quickly by using keywords. And so make sure that whatever it is that's important for your type of work that you do, to put those in your resume someplace. Similarly, spell out and use abbreviations and acronyms, because you don't know how we're going to look for it. So, for example, like today I was doing a different presentation and there was an attorney that had DOL on the resume. Well, if I'm looking for an attorney that's an employment attorney, I may put DOL. I may say Department of Labor. You don't know which I'm going to use. So put both on there in case I search the word labor instead of searching DOL. Same thing like with Apex. Make sure your document attachment includes your name in the title. Okay, this is more of just an annoying thing than anything else, but I can't tell you the number of times someone will email a resume in and the attachment says resume. Okay, so we end up with a whole bunch of emails where the attachments all call the same thing. Okay, I can't just open that up and save it. I have to now rename it. Okay, so again, make it easy on the recruiter and put your document in the title. So you could say Linda Duffy resume or resume Linda Duffy or whatever, but something so if I'm taking it off an email, saving it into a folder in Outlook, or if it's in my applicant tracking system, it actually has the name in it. And then the last word about applicant tracking systems before I turn it over to Kim is complete all sections in an applicant tracking system, meaning sometimes it takes you a little bit of time to go and apply, you upload your resume and you answer some questions and you fill out a whole bunch of information. You only have to do it once normally, that's the first thing. But second of all, some systems will not actually make you a viable candidate until you complete everything in their system. Okay, so if you just partially complete it, I'm not going to be able to see your information anyway. Or if I do see it and it tells me it's partially completed, I may move on to the next candidate. So make sure that you are completing all sections in that applicant tracking system. And with that, Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can tell everybody some great interview techniques. So now that they've got the interview because they have a great resume, they're ready for your tips on how to interview.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And actually, I want to add one more thing to Linda, the applicant tracking system. I found when I did corporate recruiting forever, some people would fill out their description and say, see resume. That's not an answer, just for the record. So don't use that. Actually fill it out as Linda suggested. Okay, so now you got the interview, right? First of all, I want to say something really quick. This is not a marriage proposal, right? It's just an interview. I just did a class with some college students and we were talking about that. So I suggested to think about it like this. It's just a cup of coffee, right? You're just going to sit down and have a conversation with someone. That's how I look at an interview. But we want to make it a good one. So there's a little bit of homework. So before the interview, before you even show up, you should do a little homework. Conduct some research. Google the employer. Google the hiring manager. Make sure you read the job opportunity. Did they have a posting? Read the posting again. So be prepared for yourself. Like what do you want to know about this job that they didn't say in the advertisement? What do you want to know about the company? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And Linda provided here a really cool link to Monster. It has 100 different interview questions. I would advise if you've never been in an interview or you haven't been in one recently to take a look at some of those questions and in your head be able to answer that. There's some, and it tells you like what type of questions there are. Typically, most of the questions they'll ask you, Linda made mention to before, we'll tie that to your resume in just a moment, are to tell me a little bit like how did you do something? Like how did you get that done? What did you do to make that happen? And what were the results of that action? That's typically the type of questions they ask, and that's typically the kind of answer they're looking for. However, the reference here is great. Now, I'm going to start off with this. We spend a lot of time also training managers how to interview. Believe it or not, sometimes they're just as they're nervous just as much as nervous as you are. So oftentimes, it's like the very first question. Linda and I have used it ourselves. The very first question they're going to ask you is, tell me about yourself. So I'm going to help you right now. So have your little pitch. Don't get nervous about what that means. Don't start talking about, oh, I have 6 kids. I'm on my 3rd divorce and I'm starving. No, we want to know about your career, right? Well, I've been doing this for 15 years. I started out as Linda's example. For example, I started out as an assistant buyer for a small company, and then I got promoted to the buyer. And for the past 5 years, I've been doing, ABC. So that's it. That's all we want to know. It's just a way to open the conversation. So don't let that tell me about yourself or, give me the Susie Q story. freak you out. They just really want to know, work-wise, career-wise, what have you been doing lately and how did you get here? Like, why are you sitting there in front of them? So you don't have to give your whole life history in that question. Okay, this one's a big one for me. Whether it's your first interview with the company or your fourth interview with the company, God forbid, but bring copies of your resume. Bring a paper and a pen so you can take notes. And the other items you may have, you may not need them at the interview, but it would be nice to have them in case they ask for them. And I wouldn't actually bring them, oh, here's my resume, here's a copy of my diploma. Don't give all that at the interview, just give them your resume, but if they ask you for those things, then you have them. Just be prepared for that. We don't really typically need a portfolio of a work sample unless it's job related. Obviously, like for a graphic artist, I'm going to want to see work. Or if you put together something that I'm really impressed by and we talked about on the phone, I might say, hey, could you bring me a copy of that so we can share that with the hiring manager? Then that's when I would bring that with you. Otherwise, have it ready in case we need it. Okay. And by the way, if you've interviewed with the same company multiple times, bring a resume every time. Bring extra copies. Okay. Now, you've heard this phrase before, dress for success. You know, dress for the job that you want. And by the way, we don't need to smell that good. We don't need to smell that bad either. But just limit it. It doesn't have to be heavy. This phrase I've heard a lot, and Linda and I've talked about this before, to always be on time. But I also want to add to that, don't be too early. Seriously, don't be too early. If you get to the interview a half an hour early, most interviewers have a pretty hard schedule. Like they have an interview at 10, they have another one at 11, they have another one at 12, or they got to make a call in between, or they have a meeting with their boss. So their calendar is booked for the day. So when you get there early, like too early, and you knock on the door too early, they're going to stress out, try to make you feel comfortable and make you feel welcome. So Mike, wait in your car, read your resume, chew a piece of gum, listen to the radio, sing a song to make yourself happy, and spend that extra time on yourself if you're early. But by all means, don't be late. This is a big one. When we say be courteous to everyone you meet, I'm going to tell you guys a story really quickly. This is a big one. Is when you arrive to a company that may have a receptionist or somebody answering the door or a host of some kind, they're the first person that you meet. Those people talk. Oh my gosh, I have a story to tell you. There was this person, no joke, she was interviewing to be my boss, right? We were getting ready to do interviews for a director. At the time, I was a recruiter. This is some time ago. And she was interviewing to be the director of recruiting. Can you imagine? So she shows up at an interview. She meets the person in security, and she was running late, by the way. And she actually told the security guard, oh my gosh, I'm running late. Could you hurry up? So she gets through security. Then she has to meet the person at the front of the department. It's a big company, by the way. That's why there's so many different layers. So she gets to the receptionist, and again, she still has an attitude with her. And she was like, oh, I'm running late. Is there a restroom I can get to? So she runs to the restroom. She comes back. She checks in. She goes to the interview. Now get this. She's done with the interview. And by the way, she's like super amazing at her job and her resume. People have talked about her. We all know she's coming. Until later on, the head of all of HR, the executive VP, was on his way out the door and talked to the receptionist and said, Mr. Johnson, I have to tell you something. And they told him about the experience with this person. And then on the way out to security, same thing. Found out that she was super duper rude. And this is the heading of our recruiting department. Not only did she not get a second call, but she was invited never to apply there again, ever. So be careful who you talk to. Be nice to everybody. And I hope I can't believe I have to say this, but could you turn off your phone before you walk in the door? Not. And don't be on the phone, even if you have to wait. Even if they're being rude to you and they're making you wait, do not pull out your cell phone. Leave it in your purse, your pocket. Leave it in your car. I know some people are worried, what if my kid needs to get a hold of me? Well, put it on mute. Put it on vibrate and stick it in your pocket. Your attention should be on yourself, and your attention should be on the interviewer. Now, dressing for the interview, back it up, is obviously depending on the type of job, everybody has a different opinion about this, but business casual tends to be the most thing. But if you're interviewing for a production assistant position, then a pair of khakis and a nice shirt might be okay. But if you're interviewing for the director of the department, then you might want to wear a suit. If you're going to be a machinist or a mechanic, don't dress in your work clothes. Dress in a pair of slacks and a collared shirt. So dress for the part, in other words. Okay. All right, Linda, sorry about that. All right, moving on. This one's pretty normal. If you're nervous, it's okay to say that. I talked about that earlier. It's no need to be nervous. You're interviewing them as well as they're interviewing you. But if you're feeling some kind of nervous issue, it's okay. The minute you say it, you know what? I'm really nervous to be here today. Not only will it take the wind out of your sail and make you feel better, but it's going to make the interview feel better and realize, you know what? This person's really sincere. They're being really, really honest about who they are. It's not a drawback. It's not a reflection on anything negative. It actually makes you look genuine. But I also want you to remember to look at the person, you know, when you meet them, reach out, hi sir, nice to meet you, Mrs. Smith, I'm so glad to be here. You know, look them in the face. Even if you're interviewing for a warehouse position where you're never going to have to deal with the public, when you're in the interview, you should still reach out to the interviewer. Glad to meet you, sir. I'm glad to be here. Right? Even if you never have to talk to a human in your job, in the interview, you should still maintain good communication. Now, they're going to ask you questions. And this is my perspective. I don't like when people are slick. I don't like when people try to lie or overcompensate, you know, oh, I was the best there was. No, just be genuine about your answers. You know, and Linda listed some really good examples earlier of some achievements to use on your resume. Well, here's a chance for you to elaborate. Have some stories ready. You know what? When I got to the warehouse, it was a mess. Their inventory was a disaster. There was nothing in order. And so it took me 3 of my people in 4 weeks, and we got some things in order. This is what we did, blah, 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 and this is what happened. You know, we recovered $200,000 worth of inventory after all that work. Obviously, the story is a little bit deeper, but you get the idea. Have a story ready when you're talking about those things. Ask insightful questions. You know, this is a great chance when they're asking you questions about that, is asking them questions in return. So what as you said, you're looking for a purchasing manager. What about this person will be successful? I mean, ask the question in return. Like, what are you looking for? How will you measure this person's success? At that point, it's also okay to ask them a question. Okay. Also, while you're during the interview, this is a hard thing to recognize. Are you talking too much? Are you not providing enough detail? This is where you're watching them, watching you, right? Read your audience. Kind of keep an eye on them. If they're checking their watch, they're looking at the clock, or they're checking their phone, you're probably talking too much or you're off point. Or if they're like, keep asking you more questions and you're possibly not providing enough detail. If you're not sure, ask. You know what? Say, am I giving you too much detail? Should I move on to the next point? Or, you know, perhaps I will allow. Or say, do you need more information? So if you're not sure, you know, just ask. This one I love about appearing desperate. Now you've just sent out 100 resumes, right? You finally got 2 people to call you, and now you're finally in an interview. You're like, I have to pay rent in 2 days, and I don't have a job. They don't need to know that, right? They don't need to know that. You don't need to share that. You are an amazing candidate. They will be lucky to have you on their staff. Remember that. So don't be desperate. Don't bring the questions to the table about that. Leave it alone. Leave it off the table. You come in with you. You are an amazing individual, so leave it there, right? For some reason, when you bring your desperation to the interview, it turns the interviewer off every time. So just leave it at the table. This part's important. Now, hopefully, I'm going to go off topic just a little bit, Linda, off the slide. We brought this up a little bit. Something aside from the slide. when you first were asked to come in for the interview, there's a question you might want to ask them in return. Could you tell me what type of interview will this be? Will I be interviewing with just you, or will I be meeting with just the hiring manager, or who will be in attendance at the interview? Know who you're going to interview if they know. So they can let you know you're going to be interviewing with one person, 4 people, 2 people. Like, what is the interview system going to look like? So you can be ready. Because it's very possible that you could be interviewing in a panel, meaning they'll have 2, 3, 4 people in a room with you asking you different questions at different times, or perhaps one person's asking all the questions and they're just sitting there. So again, if it's a panel interview, it's still just a coffee date. You're just hanging out, having a cup of coffee with a group of people. It's no different than a one-on-one interview. Other than, actually, I like panel interviews. It gives you the opportunity to not have to keep going back. Okay, now, you've got the interview down, right? You're talking, you're sharing your accomplishments, you're asking your questions. Now it's time to sell yourself and close the deal. If you're interested in a job, you tell them, I'm interested in this job. What are the next steps in your interview process? If you want the job, tell them. We've had this happen before. We actually had, recently, we had 2 people that were down to the final. They was down from 12 people, then we narrowed it down to 3, and then the final 2. And only one of those 2, and actually the second one, we thought was going to get the job. She never asked for the job. She didn't follow up after the job either. But this first one, who I was a little unsure about, they also liked, but she actually said, you know what, I'm so excited to be here. I'm so happy that I got to interview with you. I can't wait till the next steps. I want to work here. Guess who got the job? Yes, the one who said so. Okay, hopefully if they have business cards, ask them before you leave, may I have your business card if they have one? Because as soon as the interview is over, make sure you say thank you to everyone you met that day, and then afterwards follow up with a written thank you note or thank you letter. We've had some, since the modern time of technology, you'll see a lot of different articles. Some say, oh, it should be by email. No, it should be by postal mail. In my personal opinion and in my experience, either one is okay. Whatever your personal preference is. I love handwritten thank you notes, but an email is just as appropriate. Also gives you a chance to add information in the thank you note. I think it could be a great fit because, bringing up something that was a hot point for them in that email. Following up appropriately is a thank you note. Let's say that the interviewer said, you know what, we will not get back to anybody until next Friday. Does that mean you should call every day until Friday? No. Don't be a stalker. Stalker candidates are annoying. It's not pleasant. Most of us have caller ID. We can see that you called 30 times, so don't do it. Follow up with your email. Hey, thank you very much for the interview, blah, blah, blah. And then if they said they'll get back to you in a week then and you haven't heard anything, that's where you get back to them. But don't be a candidate stalker. Don't do it. Don't bug them every day. It's rude. And it shows desperate. Okay. So you have a great resume. Your interview went well. What's the next part? Happy dance time. When you get the job, celebrate. Celebrate that success. And before we have some time now to ask, to allow for questions. What could we answer for you?
Great job, Kim. Maggie, do we have any questions?
Let me look. Thank you, Linda and Kimberly. Let's see what we have here. If cover letter is not recommended when we apply a job through mail, what do you suggest us to put in the email message?
What I would do is if you have something specific, again, the person, you have a connection, it's a warm introduction, anything like that, then by all means put that in the email. I assume we're talking email. Put that in the email, or if you met somebody maybe you're at a networking event, you meet somebody, or it's a job fair or whatever, and you're saying, oh, it was so nice to meet you last Tuesday at the job fair or at the networking event. You can put something like that. But here's what happens with most cover letters. It's the same thing with objectives on resumes to me. It's all motherhood and apple pie fairy tale language, right? It's like, I'm looking to use my considerable skills and talents for the betterment of the company. It's just a waste of space. So unless you have something meaningful to say, something unique to say, then don't worry about it. You don't need it. Because if it all sounds the same, it's just a waste of space. So if there's something you can do to call out common ground you have with that person, that you've been introduced, you've met before, that it was a referral from somebody you both know, that by all means I would make reference to. Kim, how do you feel about cover letters?
I agree with everything you said. There's nothing different. I do have one comment that's aside from all that, and looking at our email just reminded me about the email that you use. Party Girl 22 is not a good email to use, yes. Right? Or my dog loves me at so-and-so. No, keep it generic. If you have to make one up just for the purpose of job hunting, then use your name, Scott Kimberly at yahoo.com or whatever. Clean up your email, use a generic one. Don't make it personal or controversial.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's not professional to use fun emails. It's fun with your friends, but not on your resume.
Yeah.
We do have another one. If my last job ended under not the best circumstances, can I not include it on my resume?
Yeah, I mean, you have to make a decision. Yeah, you can leave it off. That's not a problem at all. You have to, it depends on how long it was. Like, I've had situations with friends and colleagues who maybe they went to a job and for whatever reason it didn't work out and they left a few months later. I would tell them just leave it off, right? If you were at that job for 5 years and now your resume looks like you haven't worked in 5 years, you're going to have a problem with that as well. So you have to sort of balance those things off. I always tell people, look, you've got to have a story to tell people, right? I care less about like the dates and how long you were at different places. If you can explain it, like, listen, Kim got laid off, during the, in recession. I lost my job in the recession. Like, a lot of stuff happens to people through no fault of their own, right? That's fine. If it happens consistently and you're out of work every 3 months, then you've got a bigger issue to deal with, right? So can you leave it off? Yes, you can leave it off. It's not a problem.
The only time it may become an issue is when you have to fill out the actual job application. Usually not required of you unless you're going to be considered for the job. Then you have to be specific about your work history. That's if they do a background check. But otherwise, your resume is just a conversation.
Here is another one. How is it possible to get experience in the supply chain industry when you have no experience as a recent grad? And I'm guessing they're asking that from a resume standpoint, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I would say this is, if you're a recent grad, I would start like connecting with people like crazy, right? Apex is a great organization to do that. Go talk to, the professionals at Apex. Talk to your professors. Talk to people that play in that space and do whatever it has to do, because we all start at some point in time, right? You have to be willing to suck it up a little bit and look for entry-level work or work that, may be a stepping stone to your ultimate position. You can't expect you're going to walk into a company and apply to be purchasing manager if you've never done any work before. So I would definitely say continue to connect through educational opportunities, networking events. You can go talk to people at job fairs. Just keep connecting, because here's the thing. I took out some of this presentation that I did for a different organization. There's different ways you can get a position. Certainly applying for ads is going to be your lowest percentage for everybody, not just for a recent grad. Probably, 10% of the time that's how you get a job. Probably another 20% of the time you're going to get it through a recruiter. So you certainly can seek out recruiters that play in that space as well and go talk to them and let them know what they're looking for. And they may come across an open position or a temp agency or somebody like that. Your highest probability shot for everybody, regardless of whether it's entry level or vice president level, is going to be networking. And that's probably about 70% of the time how people get jobs. That was from after I got my first job, which was answering an ad. I either got all of the rest of my jobs through networking or from recruiters. So that's pretty common. So you just have to figure out, okay, where do the, recruiters and hiring managers for, supply chain type jobs hang out? And just sort of figure it out. And it's going to be at Apex meetings, and it's going to be maybe at job fairs or other networking events. Kim, what ideas do you have?
I would add to that, especially if you're a recent grad, also to follow those companies on LinkedIn and follow those companies on Twitter. Sometimes you'll see somebody reference an opportunity, an event that comes up for that company where you can actually go meet people in person. So follow them. Follow the companies that interest you. Also, on your resume, we're talking about accomplishments. So you may not have performance accomplishments yet. You haven't worked yet. But this is where you can brag about your academics. You won a scholarship, right? That's an crazy, well, you graduated, that's an accomplishment too. But you had honors in a particular class, or you had a project that you're really proud of in a particular class that relates to that job. Highlight those on your resume as well. Your GPA in your business class is all 4.0. That's something that attributes to that type of work. I would also seek out internships wherever possible. Even if they're not related, internships give you the opportunity to learn other types of jobs that you may not even have thought of before. Don't isolate yourself to one industry so early on. You might be able to get to the supply by doing distribution first, right? You might be able to get to supply by doing something else before you get there. So be open to all possibilities.
Let's see. An attendee asked if the session is being taped, and will they receive a link to this tape session? It is being recorded, and you will receive a link. And let's see. How can I relate my previous employment outside the logistics supply chain industry on a resume?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. And what you just have to think about is transferable skills. So that's where perhaps using a functional resume may serve you better than using a chronological one, right? Because you can sort of switch the focus over to transferable skills. I have to tell you, a lot of hiring managers are not really great at thinking outside the box. Whenever we sit down to start doing a search for a client, and we only do retained search work before all of you send us your resumes, we only do retained search work, meaning we're hired by the client to find somebody for that position. So we only do a handful of searches each year as opposed to contingency recruiters and temp firms. So when we sit down with them, of course, they want someone that's been doing that exact same job in that company for the last 20 years and has never left. I mean, that's what every single one of them wants when we start out. So you really have to give some thought to how can what I did in this other position, how does it relate to what I'm doing over here in terms of the skills, in terms of, again, demonstrating your accomplishments in one area will lead them to believe that you could be equally accomplished in that area. I feel like I'm not being specific enough for you, but I sort of need to know a little bit more to come up with some better advice for you. Kim, do you have anything that you might add?
Oh, you just gave great advice. It's perfect advice. The transferable skills are exactly, as you know, I share resumes with you all the time that don't have the exact job title because of the work that they did, right? But I'm a rare breed. Most recruiters follow the format, and if you don't fit in that format, your resume goes out the door. I believe that a functional resume in this case, where you can focus on your other skills, your management skills, your organizational skills, some of your accomplishments, will probably serve you much better than the typical order. That's great advice.
Great.
That looks like about the only questions. We do have quite a few people saying thank you, Linda and Kimberly, and what a wonderful job.
Awesome. Well, thanks to all of you for participating today. And again, we have our emails and our phone numbers up here. So if you do have any questions we didn't get to, shoot us an email. We'll be happy to advise you any way we can. And good luck. Best wishes in your job search.
Yep, it's hard work, so eat your Wheaties and take your vitamins.
Yeah, exactly. All right, everybody, have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye.